right, we're going to call this meeting to order.
It's on the back side.
On the back side?
There you go.
Okay.
Got it.
All right, so we're calling this meeting to order. If we can get a roll call.
Will do. Chair Cuevas,
Here.
Commissioner Lomelli, Commissioner Medina,
Present.
Commissioner Morales.
Present.
We have a quorum. Thank you.
Okay, all right, so. Welcome to the Planning Commission meeting. Today is Tuesday, June 13th. And the time, I don't know if I need to say it, 6 o'clock, according to my phone. Okay, so and this is a special meeting. Our meetings normally start at 6:30, but today's meeting,
There are no corrections to the agenda for tonight's meeting.
can we have somebody read that, please?
Will do. Let's see, at this time, the general public may address the Planning Commission on any items listed on tonight's agenda, including non-agenda items or items that are listed on the agenda that are within the subject matter of the Planning Commission. Please be aware that the maximum time allotted for members of the public to speak shall not exceed 3 minutes per person. State law prohibits the Planning Commission from taking any action or entertaining extended discussions on a topic not listed on the agenda. Please show courtesy to others and direct any comments to the chairperson. Thank you.
Is this better? All right, thank you. I didn't realize it until I looked around, sorry. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is staff communications.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to take this time to make an announcement that there will be a scoping meeting tonight in the lobby of City Hall in connection with the draft environmental impact report for the general plan update. That concludes public comment.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the Planning Commission meeting minutes for April 18th. The recommendation is to approve the meetings from that meeting. Oh, yeah, held on April 18th, 2023. Is there a motion to approve the meeting minutes?
I can motion to approve the meeting minutes.
And I'll second that motion.
I second. I motion second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second.
Okay, I'll take a roll call. Chair Cuevas,
Aye.
Commissioner Medina,
Aye.
Commissioner Morales.
Aye.
Those are approved.
Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is the consent items, general plan update. Oh, sorry, and public scoping meeting. Director, you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So item 2 on tonight's consent calendar relates to a receive and file presentation regarding the city's comprehensive general plan update. Kaiser Ringwala will go ahead and take lead on the presentation. Thank you.
Good evening, Chairperson, members of the Planning Commission, staff, and members of the community. I will provide a brief overview on the general plan and the downtown specific plan, all of the work that has occurred till date. It is my understanding that we may have 1 or 2 new commissioners. So as I go through the presentation, and if there are things that you need more clarification or more information about the background, please pause me. This is intended to be in a for your benefit, so I want to make sure that you understand all that's in the plan and in these 2 documents. And then we also have, following this meeting, some displays in the lobby where you can actually take a look at the draft copies of the plan. and take a look at some of the visuals. We'll be around, so if you have any questions, you can ask us either through the presentation or following the presentation in the lobby. And then following my presentation, we'll have Rincon come up and provide their presentation on the scoping meeting, which is the second half of today's presentation. Okay. I have it. Thank you. I believe you can see your screens and the images. Okay. So I'll just use one of those screens. We're working at two scales. The general plan is a policy document that talks about future growth, growth that we can plan for and anticipate in the next 20 years within the city. And it's not just growth, but it's also reinvestment and preservation, because you have fairly stable environments within the city, and you want to preserve those. So it's a plan that looks out at the future. So we're doing that at the general plan level, which is a policy level document. And then we are honing in and taking a deeper dive into the downtown to produce a document called a specific plan. The difference between the two is the specific plan needs to be 100% consistent with the general plan, with the long-term plan. And because they're produced at the same time, they're 100% consistent. In essence, the specific plan, the key difference between the two is a specific plan is based on a vision, just as your general plan is. It has policy statements, but it also has a code. And that's an important distinction. It has regulations for development, and it has implementation section that calls out certain public and private investment. So it's a deeper dive into the downtown area. The general plan is divided into various focus areas, and you can see those circles on the left-hand side. Natural talks about air and water quality, access to nature. Prosperous talks about jobs, attracting and retaining existing jobs. Active talks about parks, recreation. Creative talks about arts, culture, promoting various aspects, various assets that you have within the community, and then providing some of the needs. And then healthy and safe are related topics, but they're dealt in two separate chapters. Healthy talks about access to food, talks about physical activity, but also mental health. And then safety talks about hazards, both man-made as well as natural hazards. And there are certain regulations and legislations that we have to comply with, recent legislation. So those are addressed in the safety component. Now, parallel to that is the housing element, which is a component of the general plan. And I cannot tell you, this is a huge accomplishment for the city and for your staff to have a certified housing element. And it's roughly been, what, a year almost since certification? When the city was certified, you were the second city in the county. That's just huge. There are still cities that are struggling to get certified. So that's just a tremendous achievement for this planning commission and for your staff. But again, because it's produced at the same time, it's 100% consistent. So you're not only planning for housing in the next 8 years, but you're making sure that plan is then consistent with a larger plan, larger framework, which is your general plan, which is a 20-year plan. And because you're working on a specific plan, you're already rezoning as part of the specific plan all of the properties that are called out within your housing element for where growth is likely to occur. So it's a wonderful opportunity to guide the future growth, and you're right in the throes of it. So those new members, welcome. This is a great time. You're gonna be creating a legacy for Montebello. We've been working now for a little over a year and a half, 2 years, and we've had a number of meetings in the community at various locations. So this is a very community-driven process. It's a vision-driven process. It's a plan that's imbued and built out of the needs, aspirations, and future desires of the community members. And they've been working on all of these three aspects at various focus group meetings. The housing, for example, the housing element document and housing task force. Various members of the Planning Commission participated in that task force. Some of your predecessors participated in that. So the document has involved numerous community meetings, numerous outreach efforts. And yeah, for a moment, I thought that was blackout. So as I mentioned, it's based on a vision. As I mentioned, the general plan looks at future growth, but more important than that, it looks at preserving the existing areas that are stable. So the very first diagram you see, the yellow areas are the areas of stability. These are areas where you have existing residential subdivisions, you have existing industrial areas that are fairly stable. But then within the core, you have opportunities for reinvestment, and those are areas where growth can be directed. New growth, new reinvestment can be directed. And the second map is the green infrastructure map. It's actually how do you take existing and proposed assets within the community and then tie them together in a green infrastructure. Those could be streets, those could be greenways, using the Rio Hondo, for example, as a connective tissue that not only connects various neighborhoods within the community, but also connects Montebello to the region in a non-motorized way. This is part of the Emerald Necklace that I believe is either I might be wrong on my number. I think it's a 17-mile necklace that connects back to the LA River, but connects various communities. So it's a connective tissue that connects and provides mobility, but also provides various other environmental, economic, creative aspects, active community, all benefits coming from that connective tissue. So if you look at the first map and you look at the third map is essentially a refinement of the first map. So as we look at the inner core area, we quickly realize that really the growth opportunities are along your corridors. The corridors, the downtown area, and then some of the parcels that you have, large parcels that you have along the freeway, where reinvestment opportunities are the greatest. So the two circles that you see, the one, the upper, the Whittier Boulevard is the downtown area, and the second circle is along the Washington, where you have opportunities in the next 20 years to capitalize on the transit corridor and use those sites for, thank you, as redevelopment opportunities present themselves. So we're primarily focused redevelopment on these corridors. And that's the same plan that you saw in the other slide, and then the larger image is an illustrative plan. Now, this is a plan that shows not 20 years, but it shows a built-out scenario. It could perhaps be multi-generational, even 100 years. But we start with the end in mind, and we work back, and we work in increments of 20 years for the general plan, 8 years for the housing element. But we have a vision of where we want to be in the next 100 years. You recently celebrated your 100 years, and this is looking at what the city would potentially could become in the next 100 years and planning for that. Now, as I mentioned, most of the growth is focused around your corridors, some of your vacant sites, some of your underperforming sites on the corridors, and we have assessed the residential potential for that, as well as commercial potential. And this is, again, just want to remind everybody, this is the next 20 years. So I think it's roughly 16,000 units, say 16,000 plus units in the next 20 years that could potentially be developed under this general plan. Now, that's not to say that it is going to happen, because not all of those parcels that are highlighted will develop. But we want to set it up so we are anticipating growth and planning for it. So if it does happen, here's the format it needs to happen, here are the impacts, we've assessed those impacts, and we've planned for them as they occur. So just to give you a context, Montebello currently has about 19,000 plus housing units. So this is adding 16,000 more units. Your current population is a little over 62,000, roughly around that. If everything were built out, again, that's a big if, you're looking at a population of close to 100,000 people in the next 20 years. The general plan land use map is the heart of the general plan, which provides directions to future investors, future people who want to build within the community. And it's a range of place types. So rather than calling out certain land use colors, we've also described the character and intensity of those areas. So whether it's an open space or some ag land that you have along the Rio Hondo, or a residential neighborhood, or a transit corridor, or even the downtown area. These are special places, and we want to define what those places are and anticipate and accommodate growth and plan for growth within those areas. Here's a special look and a closer look within the downtown area. The downtown area builds around three main assets. To the east, you have a really underutilized asset, which is a huge, huge asset, the Rio Hondo corridor. And the attempts is to connect the Rio Hondo corridor to the downtown area. And I'll share with you some images that at least provide one option of how that could occur. So that's reinforcing your eastern gateway. And you have a lot of redevelopment opportunities and projects that have been entitled by this planning commission and have gone through and received approval from the city council that are planned in that corner. So you can create a really great gateway site, gateway intersection at that location. And then within the heart of the downtown, the 100% intersection, which is where the heart is of Montebello. It's the corner of Montebello and Whittier, and just off that is plans for a new public plaza, because downtowns are a place of gathering, and we want people to gather there. Most of the time, we gather to spend, to eat, to recreate, and here's an open space, a public realm that provides that opportunity for people to enjoy themselves and enjoy each other within the city. And it's one of the areas where the pedestrian trumps the automobile. So it's designed for automobile. It's designed as a drive-into experience, not a drive-by or a drive-through experience. And then the third asset, which is just outside your downtown, but it's walkable from the intersection of Montebello and Whittier, is the city park, and all of the assets that you have, all of the wonderful assets that you have, and programming that occurs around the year in the city park. So these three assets reinforce the downtown specific plan. So what you're seeing here is Whittier. At the top of the screen is the Rio Hondo channel, and then as you come down, you see the corridor, and you see the new plaza, and I'll share another image of the plaza. But during the community meetings, a resident brought up the idea that, hey, the city had a moniker, and it was known as City of Flowers. And how can we celebrate that? And our landscape architect worked with the community and identified certain corridors that could have very special trees. You know, driving into town, I noticed that the jacarandas are in bloom. And you know, the jacaranda street trees could be one of the street trees that define and provide identity to a neighborhood. So it can become, again, a city of flowers, where the flowering trees are defining one of the components that defines the identity of individual neighborhoods. Here's that plaza, and the plaza is the Whittier Boulevard at the intersection of what is now 7th Street. 7th Street is a one-way street at that point. This plan is proposing closing that off and actually creating a pedestrian plaza that extends up north. Now, the exact location of where that plaza is, it can, you know, as you work out the details, that could move. But what this plan is pointing out is you need a place for people be a place where people can congregate in the downtown area, and you can have your celebratory events within the downtown area. This is an image of Rio Hondo, and it shows the connection into the downtown area, the various projects that have been entitled, and opportunities for those projects to, rather than turn their back, to actually open up to the Rio Hondo. So you can have steps leading up to the channel. And in this case, there's an opportunity right at Whittier with the new project to create a new sculpture park. So it steps down with ramps as well as steps with a variety of public art opportunities along the way into the Rio Hondo. Now, all of this is a vision, but the codes, and this is a specific plan, so the codes are based on that vision. It's a place-based code, form-based code that relies on the design of the public realm. And the public realm is one of the last things that typically gets into your zoning code. Oftentimes you talk about what land uses are allowed on private land. Rarely you talk about the streets, the open spaces, the standards that define that. So this one starts instead in the public realm, where most of the people interact. You and I interact in that public realm. Some of us may have business in the building when we enter the building, but most of us are within the public realm. And as you pass by, and that's the identity of the community, the public realm, that defines the health of the community, how well a community is doing. So we have street sections that lay out certain provisions, certain requirements, so that will be examined in the design of Whittier Boulevard, and then certain requirements for buildings. So as buildings get built on Whittier and higher intensity buildings, we're very cognizant, because this is a corridor, the second layer of that corridor is a residential neighborhood. So we have some special standards saying you can add on to Whittier, provided you take off the same mass in the back as the building meets the neighborhood. So you have a very contextual development rather than a box going up that may be fitting on Whittier, but may be out of proportion as it meets the neighborhood. So these are form-based standards. We've also taken a look at the process. The housing element now requires ministerial approval, which means most of the development that is providing affordable housing will go to your planning staff. If appealed, can come before the Planning Commission. So the time for your involvement, that's why this is a very important document. Your role as a Planning Commission, in many cases, design review committees and city councils has been redefined to do planning and to leave the administrative work and to facilitate a streamlined review process whereby the developers who want to build per these standards, they're high standards, but if you want to build per the standards and build per the vision, the city is making the good easy to build and providing a streamlined review process. So we've taken a look at the steps in the development review process, and we believe, and that's the chart that you see on the upper right, that there are some elements that may not be value-added elements or value-added steps that can be either eliminated or further streamlined. This is an image of Washington Boulevard as you look out in the future, and there's a lot of planning that needs to happen on Washington Boulevard in terms of whether it's at street, at grade, above grade, where is the station, what are some of the opportunities. That is likely to happen in the future as you continue to work with Metro and the community in designing that. But as the general plan, it takes into consideration that this is going to be a huge opportunity in the southern section of Montebello to provide investment, to provide further amenities, whether it's open space, whether it's mixed-use development, whether it's retail, or other public facilities. Part of the general plan, and certainly the specific plan, is to look at the mobility, how people move. And I'm very specific in mentioning how people move as opposed to how we move cars. because the goal of mobility is access. It's not a trip. It's not a vehicular trip. So we want to explore a variety of options that are available in the city. In the downtown area, we're looking at the concept. As you look at the map to the left, that's a citywide map. It shows the existing transit line, shows the Rio Hondo corridor as a connective tissue. So if you want to bike, walk, that is an opportunity that's available that connects various assets within the city, but also connects to the region. And then within the downtown area and those areas where you don't have easy access to transit. And what we mean by easy access is you cannot walk 5 minutes or perhaps 10 minutes to a transit stop. In those cases, we want to explore what planners and engineers term as first mile, last mile. And that essentially means if I'm going to use transit when I get up in the morning to go to the station, that's my first mile. How do I get there? Do I have to drive, or are there other opportunities available? So we want to avoid that trip, that automobile trip. What are some of the options? The same thing happens when I'm returning home from work in the evening, last mile. How do I get from the transit stop, which may be in the downtown area or maybe at the corner, to my house that is 1.5 miles away? And there are a variety of transit options, including the one that Monica and Joseph and his planning staff are working with the Public Works Department on developing a citywide master plan for the bike network. So looking at a variety of opportunities to provide non-motorized mobility within the city. We also took a look at the creative assets within the city. And when we started, this map really surprised us because there are a plethora of creative expressions within the city. And we try to map some of these, and you can take a look at the map, but it really provides a huge opportunity to capitalize on the prosperity that you get from promoting creative businesses, for example, in your city, but also promoting tourism. You have a number of assets that are historic, for example. Historic preservation. The city currently doesn't have a historic preservation program, but this is an opportunity to at least take that baby step. You are a 100-year-old city, and you should have a lot of historic assets, but those assets have been altered over the years because you didn't have a program in place. So as you work in the future, having this program will protect some of the assets that you have that are 40, 50 years old, but as you move forward, some of the assets that you're going to create for the future generations. So having this program is incredibly important. We, community meetings, many people had expressed some interest in getting that. So that is the cultural equity. You have a variety of people from a variety of different backgrounds, different ethnicities. This allows them to express and be part of the community and to really draw in people from other communities as you celebrate your cultural identity. Opportunities for public art. I mentioned public art, the sculpture garden that could connect your downtown to the Rio Hondo. But public art also is an opportunity for projects that are both occurring in the private realm. So you can require, for example, many cities have, and I think you're working on it, 1% of their entire fee, entire project fee, or percent of the permit fee be applied to public art, or 1% of the entire public infrastructure projects. So projects that are roadway construction or bridges, you're not building any bridges, but roadway resurfacing, some of those projects, and some of the major projects like the Montebello intersection with the railroad crossing, as that gets redeveloped, 1% of that project could be in public art that celebrates the history of the community. And then we also talk about in this section capacity and leadership as you move forward. You need to have capacity in your staff, in your city. It doesn't have to be city, but it could be, doesn't have to be city officials. It could be within the city, different agencies that are existing that may want to play a role. Now, here's the good news. Your current asset in the city, as you look at property, you are actually the board just like a business board, your portfolio is worth $7 billion. Your properties in the city are worth $7 billion. That's your portfolio. That's what you've created in the last 100 years, using entire city mass. As you look forward, in the next 20 years, using a fraction of your land, you're going to create 85% of that amount. So this plan calls for investment along the corridors, and what you're seeing there is not building heights. So relax, we're not talking about skyscrapers being built in Montebello, but these are expressions of how productive that land is in terms of its revenue production, right? So some of the properties along your corridor are incredibly pregnant with opportunities to have that productivity. Some are already. In fact, the most productive land and the most productive parcel is a bank building at the corner of Montebello and Whittier. It produces and it yields about $20 million, I think it's close to $20 million. But because it uses the site more intensely, it is producing more value for the city. And that's what the plan does, is using less of the land and then and creating an intensity within those parcels to yield in the next 20 years what the city took 100 years to develop. So $5.7 billion over the next 20 years if this plan gets built. Okay. There's a lot of information that I shared with you, and it was just a snippet and a lot of information in the documents. I very much encourage you, certainly the new members, to read those documents and to attend. There's a lot of public input process that is still left, some that we're going to kick off today with the environmental documentation. Please be involved. What we want is your early involvement and your early feedback, because I think that would be more productive for us to incorporate those into the documents. So with that, I will stop and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Any questions for Kaiser? If not, I have a question. You can. You're good? Okay. I have a question.
As a whole, so yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you and great job for what you've been doing, gathering information and presenting to the community and gathering, information from the community and feedback. And I'm sure that's been helpful and kind of, expand the general plan that we have needed. We've talked about this many times here during our planning commission meetings, so it's very helpful. But I know that, and we've talked about this as well in our planning commission meetings, that seems like a lot of our community members are resistant to development. And but having a plan that will help us hopefully, achieve a lot of, the improvements that are needed in the community, the green belts that you talked about, the corridors that will help us connect the north and the south and to the downtown area and to the pedestrian, walking areas that could be helpful for our families to be able to go outside, but also, connect us to public transit and all that. As you progress through this process and as you communicate with our, again, residents, in relaying some of this information back to them, has some of the attitude in terms of, again, development change? And as, the better they understand the plan and the better they understand, what the objective is, has that been your experience?
Yeah, I think that's a very astute observation, and I appreciate the question. People are rightly upset at development and growth. because you see what's being built in the last 20 years. And most people recoil, saying, if that's growth, give me less of it, right? Because what I measure in terms of that growth is the impacts that has. And my quality of life with each project is deteriorating, not increasing. And that can be fiscally, that can be in terms of recreation, that can be in terms of economic development, that can be in terms of creative expressions. If you're losing something, what am I gaining? If you're losing a valuable piece of land, and that's now being part of a development community, what does a community gain besides housing? Housing is incredibly important, but I'll give you an example. Montebello Hills, I mean, it's providing 300 acres of open space and making it accessible. So that's a return on investment. It's providing, again, a fiscal gain to your revenue stream, which allows you to continue to do all of the other things. Because if you look at your budget, a chunk of the budget goes to public health and safety. There's very little that's distributed to other things. So if you're going to improve your streets, provide parks, you need to work with the development community because they are going to be bringing some of this. You need the private sector, you need the development community, but you also need safeguards. And that's where we are coming up with standards to make sure, and objective standards, they're high standards that safeguard community interests. So first, do no harm, recognize the context, and then build to that context and add value in a variety of ways to the community. So that's really the message that has resonated well. We started with the community, and they helped us define the areas where they want to see growth. So as they look at some of the corridors, and they look at some of the broken teeth that you have in the corridors, broken teeth is essentially a vacant lot or a parking lot or an underperforming asset, saying, yeah, that's a good site where we want to redevelop. But they also are concerned about how that gets redeveloped. What scale, what mass, what proportion, and how it fits in, what assets and what amenities, and how it can add value to the neighborhood. So it's a larger dialogue, and I think that having it at the general plan level allows us to integrate all of these aspects and bring a richer discussion rather than what typically happens at your setting, which is more reactive. I bring in a development plan, I hand you a set of dots and saying, go at it, as opposed to this, which is proactive. You can step back and you can plan and bring all of these things to act together to create a whole that's better than and larger than the sum of the parts.
Thank you. I think Director Palombi wants to either make a comment about what you just stated, or maybe he just wants to add some comments in general.
If I may, I'd like to just add a little bit. I think, Kaiser, obviously, striking a balance is critical, right? When you have existing community and a vision for future growth. But I will say that having a plan, it elevates the conversation. And I think our economic development manager, who's in the room, can attest to the fact that having conversations with groups that are looking to, for example, bring in a grocer or a good high-level retailer, which is, I think every city wants, having a general plan that's in process, 80% there, it changes that conversation, and it makes it easier for us as staff to really have these conversations and come to the table where their ears are open and they're interested in the potential here in the city of Montebello. And that's the goal, I think, having the plan and making sure that the community is involved in that plan, and that's where we are. I mean, and that's what the purpose of the update today and the scoping meeting is, just to make sure that we're all on the same page.
Thank you. That's helpful, and I think you used a term that's very, very valuable in terms of balance. I'm not a planner, but I work with planners. And one of the things that I, at least, and you're probably familiar with this, how it occurred or happened in downtown and the Arts District, where the city did not have a general plan for that area, and it kind of started growing by itself. But it was a hodgepodge of developments from high-rise buildings to restaurants and bars and clubs with not a perfect balance at times, but having a plan that you work towards to achieve kind of gives a community a better balance, I would imagine, right? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Do we have another speaker? Oh. But I think this gentleman's presenting also, right? Oh. No, if you're adding to the presentation, by all means.
We pull up I had a presentation. First of all, my name is Greg Martin. I'm with Rincon Consultants, and working with the consultant team with Kaiser on the environmental impact report for the general plan update and downtown specific plan. So let's see, do we have there we go. Yes. Okay, I guess I'll look there. Yeah, so thank you for having me tonight. And let me just pull up my notes here. Can everyone hear me all right? The audience is behind me. So yes, thanks for having me, for having us. And so next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I do. So yeah, this is, as I said, it's the Environmental Impact Report, or EIR, scoping meeting. And that is a requirement under CEQA to have a scoping meeting and public input. I'll describe the process a little bit further. And it's good to have it in a public meeting like this in case there's public comment, and we're going to be asking for public input on the draft EIR. And if there are any comments from the public on what they think the scope, the contents, what it should cover of the EIR, it's good to get those in a public setting so we can get them into basically the official record or minutes of the meeting. So we'll open up to that during this meeting. I can be available for questions also during the lobby portion, but I would also encourage people, if they have comments or questions, to step up during the public meeting portion, because then it'll be a little easier to get it into the public record and take notes on it. So next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm just used to that. There we go. So an EIR, Environmental Impact Report, is a CEQA document. CEQA stands for the California Environmental Quality Act. And the purposes of CEQA are to disclose the potential significant environmental effects of proposed actions. In this case, the proposed action is the general plan update and downtown specific plan. Identify ways to avoid or reduce adverse environmental effects. Consider feasible alternatives to proposed actions. Foster interagency coordination in the review of projects, and to enhance public participation in the planning process. Now, the scoping meeting purposes are to inform the community and concerned agencies about the project and the EIR, solicit input regarding the EIR scope, and inform the community about future opportunities for public input. The purpose of a scoping meeting is not to get input about the desirability or features of the project, but specifically to gather input on the scope of the EIR. And that's one of the reasons why Kaiser's presentation and my presentation are separate, and these actually are separate functions. He's updating you on the general plan and downtown specific plan project. The scoping meeting portion is just to get input about the scope of the EIR, the Environmental Impact Report.
I'm sorry, Greg, sorry to interrupt, but we lost our screen. So you can get it back.
Oh, you did?
Somebody kicked something down? It wasn't me.
Oh, there it is. Oh.
Oh, one's back.
A couple click on here.
Okay.
Okay. Everybody see it again?
Yeah, we're good. Thank you.
Okay, and the purpose is also not to provide detailed information about what the project's environmental impacts will be, because that will be determined in the draft EIR which we've just started writing. So this is a flow chart of the EIR process. And you can see the "we are here" arrow, but I'll just go through it from the beginning. The city, first step is for the city, along with the consultant team, to prepare the notice of preparation. And we have prepared that and released it to the public and publicized it and posted it in various ways that I'll describe on the next slide. But we are here at this city solicits input on the scope of EIR content step, just in the EIR process. So which is running in, at the same time or at a different point than the rest of the general plan update process, but concurrent with it. So there's a public review period for this notice of preparation. We are still in that period, and I'll talk on the next slide also, but it goes for another month after tonight's meeting. After that, we will prepare the draft EIR. We already have begun working on it, but after that public input process, we will take and record those comments. That helps inform our work on the EIR. After that, the city, once the draft EIR is completed, the city will file a notice of completion and draft EIR availability and publicize the draft EIR, make it available for public review and comment. That's the city solicits input on the draft EIR part. That also will have a public review period that's has a minimum review period under CEQA that I'll talk about in the next slide. After that period is over, we will respond to comments, public comments on the draft EIR, and prepare a final EIR, which will include those responses to comments. So it'll include the comments themselves. It will include our responses to them. And so then the city will prepare findings to take the project hearings along with the EIR. And the first step at those approval hearings is actually to decide whether or not to certify the EIR. Basically, under CEQA, it's certifying, saying this is an adequate CEQA document. It does everything that's required under CEQA, and you're required to do that first, and then decide whether or not to approve the project. So technically, under CEQA, the decision on the EIR comes first, and then the decision on the project. Frequently, the decisions are made at the same meeting, but it's kind of just a technicality of the order. So the public review interval minimum requirements are 30 days for an initial study. We release this notice of preparation along with an initial study, basically saying what we're going to cover in the EIR, which is really every environmental impact area that's required under CEQA. And we're circulating that, making it available for public review for well more than 30 days. And then the minimum public review period for an EIR is 45 days, but it could be longer, can be longer. That's up to the lead agency, which is the city in this case. So the EIR schedule, here's some important dates. The notice of preparation was published on May 25th, so just a few weeks ago. The close of the notice of preparation, or NOP period, is Thursday, July 13th. So basically a month from tonight's meeting. And we anticipate that releasing the public review draft EIR in December of this year, hopefully towards the early part of December, not right around the holidays. And then responses to comments and final EIR later that winter or early spring of 2024, with hearings in the spring of 2024. And these are all estimated dates that are subject to change. More specific dates will be made available on the project website closer to each event. Yeah. So we welcome your comments and public comments on the scope, focus, and content of the EIR, mitigation measures to avoid or reduce environmental effects. If anyone has any ideas in that regard. Of course, in the EIR, we'll be analyzing and determining whether or not mitigation measures would be necessary and providing them if we think they are. And also welcome to I'd be happy to take comments on alternatives to avoid or reduce environmental effects. So, slide, I'll leave this up as long as you want. This basically just tells the public where to submit written comments to, and in writing is good, just because it creates a good, definite record of exactly what the comment is, but verbal comments are welcome as well. And that's just to Joseph Palumbi, Planning Community Development Director, and I won't, at the basically City Hall, I won't go ahead and read through the whole address unless you want me to.
No, I think it's fine, right? It's fine. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no, I'm just, and I'd be happy to take comments or questions at this time.
Any questions for the presenter? No? I've some questions or maybe a request. For transparency's sake, for the public that's here and maybe some of the community members that are watching this from home, can you expand a little bit more on what the environmental impact is to a community when it comes to development, like noise, traffic, and maybe ways of mitigating some of that in the report? There could be some, concerns that could be raised, or if people want to, then, we want to make sure that they kind of maybe look into this a little bit closer and give you their feedback. So again, we provide the best available and possible service to our community, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, and under CEQA defines issue areas.
I'm sorry, a California requirement, right, for development?
Yeah, CEQA is the California Environmental Quality Act. That's was a state law that was put into effect in the 1970s. Started off more limited in scope, I would say, than it is now, and it's basically expanded over the years to include more issue areas. An issue area would be, for example, aesthetics or transportation. Many others, land use, of course, noise, hazards and hazardous materials, and many others. And actually, in the notice of preparation, which has been made available to the public, it lists all the issue areas that will be covered in the EIR, and it's all the required issue areas under CEQA. And there have been some that have been added in recent years that didn't originally exist in CEQA or are much more recent additions, such as tribal cultural resources. Cultural resources as an issue area has been around for a long time, but tribal cultural resources were called out separately in more recent years. Wildfire is now a separate issue area. There has always been some discussion of wildfire as a potential hazard in the hazard sections of CEQA documents, but now there are more specific questions about wildfire and preventing wildfire and whether or not development will exacerbate wildfire impacts or expose people or property to wildfire impacts. Greenhouse gas emissions, there's an issue area related to that. So those are some of the issue areas, and there may not be every concern that the public may have about a project may not be technically covered under CEQA. For example, CEQA does not, and in fact specifically does not consider economics a purely fiscal impact and environmental impact, unless that fiscal impact would have some other environmental impact, impact on people, or an impact or the environment. And we can take comments, on issue areas or potential impacts that are not, usually it can be related or discussed under an issue area. And recently, actually, the analysis of transportation impacts has changed considerably. Parking itself used to even be its own separate impact question, and that was cut out of CEQA because that was considered to be an environmental impact in itself. But now, within transportation, LOS, level of service, there's a state law saying that should not be the standard that's used, the metric that's used to measure whether or not there's a transportation impact. Instead, we should be using vehicle miles traveled, or VMT. But we still use LOS for other purposes. Basically, in that level of service is basically measured by traffic delay or vehicle delay instead of vehicle miles traveled. And people still care a lot about travel time and congestion. There are features in this plan and in city policies, existing and proposed, I think, that address that and try to encourage smooth flow of traffic and reduce travel times. And traffic congestion can have other impacts, like air quality impacts. But it just decided by the state, and I think with quite a bit of input from people throughout the state, that vehicle miles traveled is a better way to measure that, because longer trips equals more emissions, more traffic, or more potential for traffic congestion per trip, et cetera. So,
Very helpful, thank you. Any other questions for speaker? No? Director?
If I could just clarify with regard to the public comments, we will log the comments as they come in and create a library. An informed response will be provided upon, the close of the public comment period, but we have to look at the comments. So what I'm trying to say is if you submit a comment and you don't get a response right away, please know that we will provide a response, and it is required pursuant to the California Environmental Quality Act to do that, so.
right. And actually, the requirement is that we take the comment and report it in the EIR as,
Yeah, as a
this was
final.
an issue, this was a concern, here's what the concern was, here's where it's addressed in the environmental impact report. It's not necessarily having to write an individual response to every comment that's taken at the scoping meeting, but it is required to record the comment and what it was about, and then in the EIR, list it, basically, and say, here's where that concern, or here's where that issue area is covered in the EIR.
Correct. Appreciate that, thank you. No more questions? No? All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Do we open it for public comment? We don't have any speaker cards, do we?
Do we have any speaker cards now?
Okay, we don't have any speaker cards, but I will open up the public comment hearing in case some of the audience individually as a whole want to come up and voice their opinion on this presentation, if there's any. So we're open for public comment. If you can, as you come up, if you can also state your name for the record, please.
Commissioners, I wasn't planning on speaking tonight, but after listening, I do have some concerns. My name is Arlene Andrade, and I've been a resident of Montebello all my life. So it's exciting to hear about all this, but I have concern that I've heard a lot about lately from different meetings that I've attended. And one thing that I didn't hear anything about was the infrastructure as far as the sewer system, the plumbing system, and what is going to be done to ensure that there are no, because I know that there's already a lot of problems with that, so what is going to be done, how is that going to be reinforced, or how is that going to be addressed? That would be my question.
Thank you. Can we have the, maybe somebody internally, or is Kaiser going to address that?
Yeah. Maybe we'll talk about capacity and.
We're happy to take that comment. The CEQA document, the environmental documentation, will consider existing growth as well as future growth, existing capacity, and then planned capacity to ensure that growth is keeping up, infrastructure is keeping up with growth. In addition, Mr. Palombi, you probably know about the downtown sewer project and
Yes.
more up-to-date information there.
No, absolutely. And when it comes to actual projects that come online, obviously, there's connections, sewer, water, and we work with our Public Works Department to make sure that we have the infrastructure. And if we do not, then we either need to upgrade or figure out ways to increase capacity so that they can accommodate future growth. So it would be something that would be addressed on a project-by-project basis, but also looked at holistically as part of the future growth. And it would basically, that would be maybe a mitigation measure or an overriding consideration that we would have to discuss in the document to confirm that the capacity would need to be addressed for any future growth. And it would be, again, studied on a project-by-project basis.
Would,
Additional thing that Greg reminded me, this is also covered in the general plan as policy statements. So we have policies that require infrastructure improvements, both by the public sector as well as the private sector, to make sure that there is. covered in the policy, and it will also be analyzed in the CEQA document.
Thank you. Would this also be another good reason to adopt a general plan because it helps us plan ahead?
Yes, yes, for sure.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you for your comment. Somebody else is coming up? If you could state your name for the record, please.
Thank you for the presentation. It was very informative. I'm just trying to put it all in context to see exactly where this fits. So there is, I think they referred to standardized forms for what entails, let's say, a full EIR report. And so when it's saying here the scope of the EIR, is it to take certain components of that for a fast track, or does a full EIR report still have a place in how it impacts the community? So that's kind of a question. I'm not sure, how that fits. And so are we to provide input on, these are some of the important aspects that should be considered? So that's the question.
And if I may?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I'll take a first, and maybe Greg could reinforce, but the levels of environmental review, they're obviously different depending on the project description. And the environmental impact report is the highest level of environmental analysis. So what we're doing here is basically, the most stringent environmental analysis required under state law. And so it's a programmatic. Is it programmatic EIR in this case? So maybe you want to talk a little bit about that and describe the level of environmental analysis that's included here and the scope of what we're doing.
Yes, so the notice of preparation that we released basically expressed or told the public that we are going to study every issue area under CEQA in the environmental impact report. And you're right, it's a programmatic EIR that will be explained. What exactly that means will be explained in the EIR, but I'll do my best to give a little thumbnail explanation of it here too, which is basically that the general plan and the downtown specific plan are programs, and projects carried under those plans would be the projects. So it's programmatic in that these plans are not, if you approve them, you're not approving specific development projects, at least not at this time. So you're approving a program of potential improvements instead of specific projects. But still, it does allow us to look at these, at the big issues, total potential growth, for example, or total envisioned growth. And under CEQA, we do look at basically, what the highest anticipated amount of growth and what are the potential impacts from that. And as Kaiser said, it doesn't mean every single one of those every single piece of that potential growth would occur, but we still, at least for impacts where the maximum potential development or maximum expected potential development, it would be, the impact would be a function of that. At least for those impacts, we look at it in that way. Not every impact area lends itself to that sort of analysis. For aesthetics, for example, it's not about adding up all the growth in the city and the impact is just a function of that. It's looking at aesthetic impacts in specific areas. And this sort of plan, which really does do a good job of describing the form of development, helps us out in that sort of aesthetic analysis. We're not looking at what would any one specific project look like and what impact would it have aesthetically in that one location. It's, for example, the aesthetic impacts along one of the corridors that's described in the plan, and there are specific ways to do that under CEQA. Visual character and quality, kind of the overall feel of the development, but then also specifically would it block views, would it produce light and glare that would have negative impacts. So those are the things we'll analyze in the EIR, and hopefully that addresses the question, but please feel free to ask me any follow-up questions.
Only, and I don't want to speak for Ms. Torres, but I think I heard her asking also about comments and feedback about specific scope or general. And I would assume that both is adequate in this situation, right?
Sure, yeah, and if there are very specific areas or very specific questions, it's fine to ask those questions or make those comments and get them put into the record. You know, for example, I was talking about aesthetics, so somebody is concerned about aesthetic impacts in their specific neighborhood, on their street, on their block. They can make that comment, we'll put it into the record and try to address, cover it in the environmental impact report. We might be, you know, covering their block or their street under one of these corridor areas, but if they have specific questions, we'll try to include some analysis of that issue in the EIR.
Thank you, that was very helpful. It was for me, I hope it was also for Ms. Torres over there. Thank you.
And I thought I would mention, somebody asked about utilities, and Kaiser mentioned that there are policies, and that's analyzed, and there are policies about it in the general plan. There is also a utilities section of the EIR, so we'll look at water, sewer, electricity, other public utilities, and then there's also a public services section, and we will analyze impacts to police and fire and other public services.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Any other speakers wanting to come up and ask a question or comment? Thank you. And again, I just want to remind you to state your name for the record.
Hi, good evening. My name is Sonia Holguin. So the plan sounds great. I didn't hear a whole lot about sustainability, though. You talked about housing, you talked about bringing in new businesses. How about some green businesses, LEED certified buildings? You talked about open spaces, you talked about brownfields. Are we going to be getting EPA funding to clean those up? Where's that money coming from? How about putting a spin on it where the citizens can start to compost, maybe have a community garden, utilizing those things? And with this influx of new businesses that we're hoping to get, and then with the change in the vehicle laws, how we have to go toward electric, what about, I didn't hear anything about charging units. Where are these cars going to charge up? And that is a lot of foot traffic. The parking will be an issue. You know, I'd like to see it go in a more sustainable route. And this is the time to do it, especially with, you've got organizations like the California Green Business Network that helps businesses. I think it's a great perspective for the city, for the residents, for the business owners to take. There are incentives, and that would help eliminate a lot of the pollution, a lot of that, the carbon footprint. So just some things to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you. If Kaiser wants to address that, but also I wanted to add a little bit of that too. You know, I think because I have heard from people thinking that all of a sudden we're going to have all this money and we're going to make this development all, you know, come to fruition at once. And I don't see that happening, of course, but it does give us, again, a map to, you know, little by little, either through projects, proposing or luring developers to our community, but also as we progress through the years and our budget, we have a plan to then, okay, maybe we need the charging stations in the street, or maybe the pedestrian, you know, walkways can be developed 1 year. Is that how it would work, if I may ask? Or maybe Kaiser can also add to that, I don't know.
I'd like to just add one, any new development would need to adhere to the building code, and the building code calls for EV chargers, and I mean, obviously green, you know, it's very sustainable, as you know. So that would be the first thing, but maybe Kaiser, if you could add a little bit about how the plan, the goals and policies call for the sustainability portion.
I think the comments made were 100% spot on, and in a presentation that 10 minutes, it's a little difficult. I do encourage her to, and I would welcome her to and read the plan document because there are various features. We believe sustainability, by the way, is a low threshold. We're aiming for a higher threshold. I'll give you a quick example that Storm Cunningham uses all the time. He's an author of a book called Rewealth. He mentions, and then gives an example saying, if I were to tell you that my marriage is sustainable, you would feel sorry for me. But if I were to tell you that my marriage is restorative, then I think that's the right target. We don't want to keep sustaining a life pattern that is not in balance with our ecology of place. We want to do better than that. We want to restore our assets, both physical built as well as social assets that we have in the community. And the specific examples that were cited are addressed in various places in the general plan, various sections. It's such a core issue that we haven't created a chapter called Our Sustainable Community because it's an item that's prevalent and addressed in all specific sections, whether it's the economy, whether it's natural environment, whether it's health and safety. So I really encourage the community to take a look at the document, and if there are areas that are deficient, we are certainly open to comments, and we want to make sure those are addressed. But we also want to strike a balance, as you mentioned earlier, between, because this is a plan, and the code will be where we'll require certain things. So at the planning level, you want to mention these items that are important and represent community values, and then follow up in the code and require these elements. But housing HCD, we just produce this housing element, and they're focused on saying, what are some of the constraints that you have towards development? So we want to strike that balance in encouraging developer, provide the incentives, and certainly the city can do its part, but encourage and create an environment where the development community is responding and providing charging stations, providing shared bikes, providing shared automobiles instead of providing parking spaces that may be underutilized. So there are various options that are available. Again, would invite and welcome feedback and comments, specific comments from the community.
Thank you. And again, I encourage more questions from members of the public. These are great questions to have the team here consider, but also some of the same questions that you have, your friends and neighbors may also have. So please come up and ask, and inquire or comment about anything that you want to hear about. Maybe it's covered in the plan already, but maybe it hasn't. So I see someone coming up to the front. Again, a reminder to state your name for the record.
Very much. My name is Vincent LaRocca. I appreciate both of your time coming up here and speaking to us. I had a chance to look at the general plan, and it was really good, and I really liked the focus on sustainability and in terms of mobility, access to different modes of transportation, consolidating some of the corridors, especially Whittier Boulevard, transitioning it from a 2-lane road to a one lane in each direction road. I really like that idea of making it more of a place to come and experience the city, as opposed to just driving through it to a neighboring city. So I really enjoyed that. The only thing I would comment on is, some of the illustrations that I saw were very car focused. So especially for the Whittier Boulevard part, I noticed that the plan was or in the general plan, it mentioned that they wanted to widen the 1 lane from 10 feet wide to 15 feet wide. So, in terms of pedestrian safety, I feel like a narrower road would be safer for pedestrians because motorists would, slow down as opposed to just speed through on a wider 5 feet of additional space for them to drive through. So in terms of the illustrations, I would like to see some, maybe icons of buses or more bike lanes. I noticed a few bike lanes added, but there's some lacking. So I really enjoyed that, that sense of multimodal transportation. Another thing in terms of more EIR would be maybe waste, considering waste, how we manage our waste. I'm not sure if, I didn't read the entire document, but in recycling, I feel like in the next 20 years, I think we should focus on how we're gonna implement recycling throughout the city, because I know a lot of the developments are gonna be multi-use, commercial and residential mixed together, and how are we gonna manage that? Are we gonna have specific codes to make sure that, recycling is done? Because currently we mix recyclables and non-recyclables and send that to a facility where they sort it out, but, just based on common sense, I feel like we're missing a lot of the recyclable materials when we're sorting all that out. So I feel like in the general plan, we should incorporate a plan to include recycling. And I would hope the EIR would include that in the scope, waste generation and managing the waste to reduce our, providing that waste to new landfills and, damaging our environment or other areas. And then another question for the EIR would be, is pedestrian safety considered as an issue area? Would that be? Okay, so that, for me, that's a critical part, because with increased population and also potential of increased traffic, pedestrian safety is going to be a bigger issue as we go forward. And you guys mentioned public works in terms of water and sewer, so that's good. Yeah, and then lastly, in terms of public transit, I feel like, we should focus on better frequency of public transit to, as growth comes, to, maintain our current VMTs, vehicle miles traveled, or try to reduce them over time, because I feel like with greater population, the only option we really have is to increase public transportation use, because we're not gonna make our roads any wider. We're not gonna, there's no other option we have except make it easier for people to get around by walking, biking, or taking transit. So I feel like we need to focus on improving transit frequency in Montebello bus lines, adding more bike lanes, and promoting more walkable communities with mixed-use development, so people can walk to get groceries, to get food, to see their friends and family, all within their neighborhoods. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments, sir. If we can have somebody just briefly address that, if that's okay, or if it's a kind of a general thing that you have studied that and feel that that's been addressed on the report, it's okay to kind of state it that way too.
Yes, in fact, 100% agreement. I mean, all of the concepts that were mentioned are addressed in various places in the general plan. About the section, I would like, and I'll follow up with the gentleman after the meeting, because we have made numerous attempts to reallocate our precious street space and provide the equitable space for the pedestrian experience or the bike experience to make complete streets. So I want to understand where the 15 feet is, because I think it may be where we have also on-street parking. So it's a lane and parking. But other than that, all of the comments that were made are spot on, and I think we're building the general plan based on those. And we welcome a review of those comments, and if there are areas that we need to reinforce, we're happy to do that.
Or maybe just simply, clarifying some points that maybe haven't been, as thoroughly covered, but yeah, thank you.
Sure, absolutely.
If I may add, the city council recently provided direction to staff and approved budget for a comprehensive bicycle master plan. So that will be incorporated into the general plan, and it will run concurrent. So we anticipate that will be wrapped in and presented for final consideration spring of next year. So I think that addresses some of the comments on pedestrian safety and as well as mobility. So we will be obviously adjourning and we'll have refreshments. So we'll be able to respond to questions in person as well. We'll be here probably until approximately 8 o'clock tonight.
Perfect, thank you.
You got it.
That's very helpful. Okay, I don't see anyone else coming up. Anybody else out there that wants to come up and say something? I encourage you to, please. If not, thank you for coming out today, and for those of you who came up and made comments, we appreciate it. It was very helpful. And with that, I'll close public hearing, and we'll get back to our agenda. And the recommendation on this item is to receive and file. So do we even need a vote for that, or? Nope. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is Planning Commission orals. Commissioners, comments? I have one. Welcome to the new commissioner. And I hope your first experience as a planning commissioner was good. You look excited, I think, unless I'm misreading you.
Yes, it's very exciting to be able to participate and listen, the exciting things that are coming to our city. So I look forward to working with all of you.
Well, we thank you for doing your civic duty and being involved in your community, so we appreciate it and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anybody else? No. All right. I guess the next item is adjournment, so we'll adjourn, and it looks like we have the area outside of the lobby area, yeah, for coffee and refreshment. So we encourage members of the public to stick around and ask questions. So thank you, and the commissioner. Thank you.